Hey, what's up, everybody? Gabe here, and I'm riding this evening after about a week of owning my XSR 900, and I thought I'd talk about it a little bit. So I'm almost on my break-in period now, so that's super. I'm going to do that oil change this weekend, I believe. It's supposed to rain anyway. And yeah, I thought before it gets dark, which will be pretty soon, I would have a little ride and talk about what my experience has been the first week of owning this bike, and also I want to talk about what I shopped it against and why I ultimately ended up picking this one. So I was into a naked bike, a naked sporty bike, like a standard, a UJM really, you might say. And after coming off that big beast ADV bike, and I wanted something more street oriented, but not another super sport with a hunch position and all that. So that leaves quite a lot of bikes, actually, because there's tons of naked bikes out there. I am really into the classic style, so I mostly narrowed that down. I'm not really into the kind of insectoid and kind of bulbous or like overly like future-y looks of, or robotic looks of a lot of the other nakeds out there. There's some that I like the look of, though, that I just eliminated because of price or other concerns, like, say, the Ducati Scrambler looks cool. It's not even crazy expensive, but it's got Desmo valves and it's air-cooled, so the service intervals suck, and I'm not interested. So, for example, that got removed. But yeah, so there was like 4 bikes I considered seriously after kind of going through that. So there's the Kawasaki Z900 RS. Mostly its problem was that it's too expensive for me. It was like $4,000 Canadian more than this bike. And also there's a weight thing, although as a street-only bike that wouldn't have bothered me as much. But I wanted to go lighter, and that bike wasn't really lighter than my KTM. It just was lower and more compact. But it's really cool looking. I love the level of detail that went into it, into making it and all that. It's just that it was very expensive. So the next one would be the Triumph Trident, the new bike for this year. 3-cylinder, 675, about 75 horsepower, so closer specs-wise to like an MT-07 rather than this one or the Z900. But that's okay. Good spec suspension and brakes. Everybody raves about how good the fuel mapping is. I like the look a lot. Never had a Triumph. It has a 3-cylinder engine like this one, so that's really cool. But you couldn't buy one, so forget it. It's the cheapest Triumph on the market that you could buy brand new. It prices better, I think, than the XSR 700 does, and you can't buy one. They sold out like immediately, so that was off the list. So that left the XSR 700. That was the other bike, and I considered that one the most seriously. I sat on them back to back next to each other in the shop a lot of times, and I was really torn between which one I should get, because they both have things I like about them. So obviously I got this one, but let me say what I liked about the 7. So the first thing is the ergonomics. I like how narrow the parallel twin makes it. They have the same fuel tank. For 2021, they even look the same. It's like literally probably the same part. 14 liters. But because the engine doesn't stick out as far, the foot pegs are closer in, and I liked how narrow it felt comparatively to this one. I also like that when I put my foot down on it, like say at a stop or something, with this one I have to be careful that the foot pegs don't get me in the shins or the ankles because of how far they stick out. On that bike I didn't have that problem at all. That's the main thing. It's lighter, it's lower, the seat's a little lower, and the bike's 20 pounds lighter, so it definitely would feel even easier to control than this one. And coming off that KTM, that ease of control feeling is something I was really looking for. I have to open my visor for a moment. It's going to be loud. I apologize. So, other than that, the 700, the other main kind of benefit that I saw was that around town, the softer suspension would make it less rigid against all the bumps and all the potholes and crap. This one has a reputation for being stiffer and that being a thing. So I was a little concerned with that. And maybe the final thing going for the 700, I mean, of course you hear a lot of people rave about the MT-07 engine, but you also hear a lot of people rave about the MT-09 engine, right? I mean, both of those engines are like among the favorites of like all motorcyclists. So, I mean, which one is the best one for me? I don't know. But I will say this, a close friend of mine, good buddy, went on a Yamaha demo day test ride a few years back, and they did not have an XSR 700, but they had an MT-07 and an XSR 900, and he rode both back to back, and he came out of there telling me, dude, I want an XSR 700, because he liked the seat and the comfort so much better on the 900, but he liked the engine so much better on the MT-07. He just liked how linear it was. He liked the control he felt he had over it, and he said that with this bike, it felt too racy. It always wanted to like egg him on, kind of. I don't know. He just felt like it was hard to just go a speed without it feeling like the bike was like trying to push forward. I'm going to come back to my thoughts on that, because that is obviously not my experience with it at all. But he told me that, and I was concerned about that, because you combine that with people saying the fueling on this bike sucks, that the driveline lash is really bad, and it's like, well, it doesn't sound like a fun around town bike when you're stuck in traffic or whatever, and like it or not, that stuff happens. I ride lots of around town stuff, so just because of that, I was a little hesitant on this one. But in its kind of pluses, of course, there's the performance. We have to talk about it. It makes 40 horsepower more. It weighs only like 20 pounds more. It has better suspension. It has better brakes. Has a rigid aluminum frame. Like from a pure performance point of view, for about 1,500 Canadian dollars, boy, you are getting a lot of bang for your buck. Quite literally bang in this case. So that was probably the biggest thing. A smaller factor, but not nothing, is that I never had a 3-cylinder bike before. I had 2 parallel twins, 2 inline 4s, and a single. This is my first triple, and it was cool to, kind of have a triple for the first time. So if I would have got the 700, it would have just been another parallel twin. So that was kind of cool. I kind of wanted to get a triple. That Triumph was appealing. That was one of the reasons it was, say, more appealing than the 700, for example, had it been available, even though other specs-wise it's quite similar. So I ended up picking this one, obviously, and now I want to kind of talk about the experience. So most stuff has been really good. The biggest negative I'm going to talk about is the rear suspension. I find it's very stiff, and when you hit potholes and stuff, it does kind of jar you. It transmits it straight into the old tailbone, and it's not the most fun experience, and the roads in Quebec are pretty bad a lot of the time, so it can be kind of rough. I have not tried softening the preload or softening the softening the rebound damping yet. I can do that on this bike. I just haven't gotten around to figuring out how I'm going to kind of try to objectively test that out, because I don't want to compromise the handling, but I don't want to ruin my rear end while riding either. So I gotta fiddle with it. I gotta find a road where I can kind of experience some twisties and experience some pain. So that's the biggest complaint. That's it right there. The fork I don't find is too harsh. My arms aren't feeling the pain the way they were on the KTM at all, so I don't have a problem with the fork. Some people say it's actually too soft, the damping on it, but at least for me, it's good. I have good front end feel. I have no problem with it. Maybe they just weigh more than I do. I don't know. Or maybe I'm just not as good of a rider to notice the difference. That's certainly possible. So let's talk about that fueling. Let's talk about the other Achilles heel, right? The fuel mapping. It's jerky. Well, okay. If you do this, it's super jerky. That driveline lash, when you do that, I felt it. It felt like I was hurting the bike, so I'm not going to do that again to make a point. Yes, that was jerky feeling, of course. But I don't go around doing that as a general rule, because why would you do that? And actual on-off throttle, like right now I'm off, and I'm on. And I'm off, and I'm on. No problem. No jerk. Totally butter smooth. I have a pretty practiced wrist. I had other bikes that were jerky, and I'm careful about it. So I guess that's just an experience thing, or the kind of bikes I've had before thing, and I'd have to back with a bike that doesn't do that to really feel the difference, but I'm smooth on it anyway, just kind of, that's my default behavior. Look, I can switch it to A mode right now. Here we go, we're in A mode. And same thing, I'm off, I'm on. I'm off, I'm on. Now, a couple more things that really kind of That was the big complaint I was worried about, but I don't find it so bad. So this bike I find is actually very good around town, because it's actually pretty easy to ride at a lower speed in traffic, on and off the throttle, even in A mode. And that's because it has very weak engine braking. Second gear, 5,000 RPM, chop the throttle, who cares? You don't feel it. I'm going to shift down to first at this light to kind of prove the point. First I'm going to rev it up, 6,000, 7. The light turned green. But like, that's fine. It doesn't rip your arms off, with the engine braking the way a lot of bikes do. Here we go, first gear. No problem, look at that. Imagine, there's very few bikes that would do that on. And, well, this pickup's pretty loud. So, I find that it's remarkable how easy this thing is to ride in this kind of city conditions, because the engine braking is not brutal. You can transition between on and off throttle easily if you're smooth enough to avoid the driveline lash, and you don't get that engine brake pulling your weight forward, ripping you out of the seat feeling, jerking you back and forth that you get with a lot of other bikes. So when you couple those two things together, and of course that this engine makes power almost right away, it's really easy to drive this in town. I have no problem holding neutral throttle in A mode, the twitchiest mode, right? No problem at all holding neutral throttle. I actually don't know why I bother with the other modes. Maybe on a really bumpy road it would be annoying, but otherwise A is fine. Go to lower gear, it's fine. So that was my biggest concern with the bike, and for me at least, it was nothing. Now I will say my buddy who test rode at the time was on my Yamaha R3. That was his bike. It was my bike first, then it was his. And he'd only really ridden that for any extended period of time. He rode some, school bikes when he did his course, and I think he rode my 600RR for an hour, and I think he rode my bike I had before that, a 650F, for an hour. But I don't think he'd had any real seat time on other bikes except for his R3. So when he got on this the first time, for all I know, maybe he had it in A mode, and it did feel like it wanted to go, because he was so used to the R3. Maybe he was giving it more gas. Maybe he didn't have that really smooth, on-off response, because he was used to an R3 where, well, I mean, you can yank it pretty hard. It's an R3. It's not going to do anything wild, right? I remember the first time I rode the R3 again after not having, because my friend had it for a couple of years after I had it, so I got to kind of re-experience my first bike in a way that maybe most people don't, after riding that 600RR, and I just banged it off the limiter constantly without meaning to. I wasn't trying, I just wasn't looking at the tachometer, and I was just trying to go, and I was so used to the 600RR, I was just banging that thing off the limiter. You would not make that mistake with this bike. You wouldn't need to feel the need to do that at all. But I will note that, maybe that's why my buddy thought this thing felt so racy and extreme, because yes, it still picks up power higher up in the revs, and you have to kind of, keep your hand in check in a way that maybe he just wasn't used to, because he'd been only riding that low-powered bike. That's my best guess. I don't know for sure. It's been a couple of years. He doesn't really remember it. That was his impression he gave me kind of right off the jump, and it's been 3 or 4 years since that happened, so he's not sure about it anymore. But it stuck with him, and he said that he'd always wanted to get an XSR 700 or like an MT-07 with a better seat on it or something, because he really did remember truly enjoying the experience of riding that thing. So I am eager to get him on this bike and see if it's, now that he has a more powerful bike under his belt for a few years, to see if his experience is different this time around. But yeah, I think I'll sum it up, because it's definitely getting dark now, and this super exciting Toyota pickup truck is kind of the only thing we've been really looking at for a while now. So I considered a couple of other bikes, mostly though the XSR 700. I was interested in it it was lighter, it was cheaper, there's some aesthetic aspects I actually like on it a little better, and the seat is nicer looking, for example. But yeah, lighter, cheaper, lower to the ground, slightly better ergonomic fit as a whole. and everybody loves that MT-07 engine so much. And I was worried about getting this one, even though it had better, kind of performance for not that much more money, because everybody said the fueling was bad, and I was worried it would be kind of miserable to ride around town. I will note that the rear suspension for me is a little too stiff for around town, and I'm going to try to play with the preload adjustment and the rebound damping adjustment to see if I can take some of the edge off the bumps without ruining the good handling. If not, I'm just going to live with it, because the KTM was bumpy too, and I lived with it just fine. So that's sort of my summary. This bike ended up not having the problems I was worried about, and so far I am very happy. Everything's gone great, and I'm eager to do my break-in service so I can really start to hoon this thing and not feel bad like I'm hurting it, basically. So, with that said, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll watch the next video, whenever that will be, or whatever that will be. So, peace.